Welcome to HOA Rejected. The board picked the wrong week to play games. Karen stood next to my property corner yelling that the HOA owned the boundary, and I was lucky she was letting me speak. I am here to protect the community. That was Sharon Lewis, Canyon Springs HOA treasurer, and she was holding a tape measure like a weapon. I had a shovel in one hand and a city permit folded in my back pocket, and all I wanted was to put up a fence on my own property line in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Sharon jabbed the tape measure toward the ground. "This is not a fence, it is an encroachment." I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off. "You did not submit for HOA approval. You think a city permit means you can ignore the covenants." I told her I followed every rule in the handbook. She snapped the tape measure back into its case. "The handbook says landscaping modifications require board review. A fence is landscaping." I felt my jaw tighten. I work as a veteran affairs benefits counselor, so I know how to read a rulebook, and nowhere in the Canyon Springs HOA documents does it say a property line fence counts as a landscaping modification. I told her that. She put on thin reading glasses and leaned in close. "I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes." That line should have been a red flag, but I let her talk, because every word was helping me. Behind her, a couple sat on their porch 2 houses down, watching like it was a show. The man had his phone out. Sharon did not notice. She was too busy measuring an imaginary setback violation on a fence that did not exist yet. I had dug a small trench for a gate latch earlier that morning, maybe 6 inches deep and 8 inches long, and Sharon claimed it was damage to the landscaping standard. She said the HOA would bill me for restoration and fine me daily until I filled it back in and abandoned the fence project. I asked her how a trench for hardware on my side of the property line damaged HOA landscaping. She said the entire boundary area fell under common aesthetic standards and I was degrading the neighborhood character. I told Sharon I had a city permit. She waved it off. City permits do not override HOA covenants. I reminded her the covenants require notification, not approval, for fences under 6 feet on a private lot line. She said the board interprets the covenants, not me. Then she stood up and walked to the corner stake, the one the surveyor had placed 2 weeks earlier. She nudged it with her shoe. "This marker is not accurate." I felt a chill. The surveyor was licensed and bonded, and the city had signed off on the survey. I asked Sharon if she was a licensed surveyor. She said she did not need to be, because she had lived here for 12 years and knew where the property lines really were. That was when I pulled out my phone and started recording. She did not stop me. She did not care. She was already calling someone. Sharon turned her back and spoke into her phone with a cracked screen. "I need a compliance hearing for the property at 428 Maple Ridge. Today. Immediate stop work and daily fines starting now." She listened for a moment, then looked over her shoulder at me with a thin smile. The management company confirmed. "You have until 5 this afternoon to submit a remediation plan, or the fine starts at $100 per day." I checked my watch. It was 11:30. The management portal was down, and I had to deliver paper proof in person today. Sharon knew that. She had timed it perfectly. I asked Sharon what remediation plan she wanted. She said fill in the trench, remove the survey stakes, cancel the contractor, and submit a formal fence application with architectural drawings, material samples, and a neighborhood impact statement. I asked how long that process would take. She said 6 to 8 weeks for review, then a board vote. I pointed out that my contractor was arriving tomorrow morning with materials. She shrugged. "That is your problem. You should have planned ahead." Then she walked back to her car, a gray sedan parked halfway across my driveway approach, and sat inside with the door open, typing on her phone. I could see her screen reflecting her face. She was drafting an email. 20 minutes later, I got an email blast. It went to the entire Canyon Springs homeowners list. Subject line: compliance update. Immediate action required. The body text framed me as the one resident who refuses community standards. It said I had undertaken unpermitted construction, damaged common landscaping, and ignored repeated requests to halt work. It included a photo of my property corner, but the photo was from 3 weeks earlier, before I had done anything. The trench was not in the photo. The survey stakes were not in the photo. Sharon had recycled an old image and passed it off as current documentation. I felt my stomach drop. She was building a fake timeline. I called my contractor and told him to hold off until I sorted this out. He said he had already loaded the truck and charged me a $50 delay fee. I told him I would pay it. Then I called the city permitting office and asked if an HOA could override a city-issued fence permit. The clerk said no, but they could make my life miserable with internal fines and hearings, and if I did not show up, they could put a lien on my property. She suggested I get a lawyer. I thanked her and hung up. I did not have lawyer money. I had a paper trail and a phone full of photos. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and built a timeline packet. I printed every email, every permit document, every survey page, every photo with metadata timestamps. I made 3 copies. One for the management company, one for the board, one for me. The packet was 42 pages. I put them in binders with tabs. I felt like I was back at work, building a benefits case for a veteran who was getting stonewalled by the system. The difference was, this time I was the one getting stonewalled, and Sharon Lewis was the system. The next morning, my contractor showed up anyway. He said he had a schedule to keep, and the city permit was good enough for him. I told him Sharon would probably show up and cause a scene. He laughed. I have dealt with HOA people before. They do not scare me. He started unloading fence panels. They were 6-foot cedar privacy panels, pre-stained, exactly what the city permit specified. He laid the first panel on the ground near the corner stake to check the fit. That was when Sharon pulled up in her gray sedan, this time with another board member in the passenger seat. Sharon got out of the car and marched over to the contractor. She did not acknowledge me. She pointed at the fence panel. "This work is not authorized. You need to stop immediately and remove all materials from the property." The contractor looked at me, then back at Sharon. "Lady, I have a signed contract and a city permit. I am not stopping." Sharon pulled out her phone with the cracked screen and started filming. "I am documenting this illegal construction for the board." The contractor shrugged and kept working. Sharon turned to the board member, a man in his 60s with a clipboard. "Write this down. Contractor refused to comply. Homeowner refused to halt work. Escalate to legal." I stepped forward. "Sharon, the city permit is valid. You cannot stop permitted work." She whipped around. "This is not a fence, it is an encroachment." There it was again. Her catchphrase. I asked her to show me the encroachment. She pointed at the corner stake. This marker was moved. The surveyor cheated. I felt my pulse spike. The surveyor had placed that stake, using a total station, and referenced it to 2 recorded monuments. I had photos of the setup. I told Sharon that. She said photos could be faked. Then she turned to the contractor and said if he set 1 post, she would personally call the sheriff and report trespassing. The contractor stopped. He looked at me. "Is she serious?" I said yes. He sighed and put down his level. "Look, I do not need this kind of heat. I will come back when you have this sorted." He started loading the panels back onto his truck. Sharon filmed the whole thing, smiling. The board member made notes. I stood there feeling my neighborhood reputation clean, and the HOA is smearing me. Sharon walked over to me and lowered her phone. "You have until tomorrow morning to submit that remediation plan. Clock is ticking." Then she got back in her car and left. I spent the rest of the day at the management company office, which was a dingy strip mall suite 20 minutes away. I handed over my timeline packet to the property manager, a tired woman named Linda, who looked like she had heard this story 100 times. She flipped through the binder. "This is thorough. I will forward it to the board." I asked when the hearing was. She checked her computer. "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, community room." I asked if I could bring witnesses. She said yes, but the board controls the agenda. I thanked her and left. That evening, I got a text from my neighbor, the guy who had been on the porch watching the first confrontation. His name was Marcus, and he had lived in Canyon Springs longer than Sharon. He said, "Dude, Sharon sent another email. This one says you damaged common property, and you owe $2,000 for landscaping repair." I opened my email. There it was. A claim that I damaged common property and must pay immediately or be charged daily. The email included an invoice from a landscaping company I had never heard of. I zoomed in on the invoice. It was dated 2 days ago, before Sharon had even seen the trench. The work description said, "Emergency sod replacement and grading repair, boundary area near 428 Maple Ridge." The photos attached showed a different property. I could see a house number in one of the photos. It was not my address. I forwarded the email to Linda at the management company with a note. This invoice is fraudulent. Wrong address, wrong date, wrong property. She replied within 10 minutes, noted, bring it to the hearing. I felt a flicker of hope, but I knew Sharon would have a counter move ready. She always did. The next morning, I went to the county recorder's office and pulled the original survey plat from my lot. I made copies. Then I went to the city and got a written statement from the permitting office confirming my fence permit was valid and compliant. I added both documents to my binder. I was up to 68 pages. I felt like I was building a legal case, which I guess I was, except the jury was a volunteer HOA board, and the opposing counsel was a woman with a cracked screen phone and a vendetta. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was the contractor. He said, "Hey man, I just got a call from the HOA management company. They said if I do any work on your property, they will report me to the city as an unlicensed operator and flag me with the building inspector." I told him I was sorry. He said, "Look, I believe you, but I cannot take the risk. I have other jobs. I am out." He hung up. I sat on my front step and stared at the empty corner where the fence was supposed to be. Sharon had just weaponized the HOA against my contractor, and now I had no way to finish the project even if I won the hearing. I called Marcus and asked if he knew any other contractors. He said, "Forget contractors. You need to focus on the hearing. Sharon is planning something big." I asked what he meant. He said, "I was at the last board meeting. Sharon does this to people. She stacks violations, inflates costs, and forces them to settle or sell. She did it to the guy on Ridgewood last year. He moved. I felt my chest tighten. I was not moving. I had been here 2 years, and I liked my house, and I was not going to let Sharon Lewis run me out over a fence." That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Sharon's line, "I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes." It was so absurd, so blatantly dismissive, and yet it was working. She had the board, the management company, and the email list. I had a binder and a bad feeling. Then I remembered something. Sharon had been filming everything with her phone. She had filmed the contractor. She had filmed me. She had filmed the trench. If I could get that footage, maybe I could find something she said on camera that contradicted her official story. But I had no legal way to get her phone. I sat up in bed. Wait, Marcus had been filming too. I texted him, "Do you still have that video from the first day Sharon showed up?" He replied immediately, "Yeah. Want me to send it?" I said yes. 2 minutes later, I had a video file. I opened it. The angle was from Marcus's porch, about 60 feet away, but the audio was surprisingly clear. I heard Sharon say, "This is not a fence, it is an encroachment." Then I heard her say, "The handbook says landscaping modifications require board review. A fence is landscaping." Then, about 40 seconds in, I heard her say something else. Something I had not caught in the moment because I was too focused on defending myself. She said, "I am making an example of him. He thinks he can move in here and ignore the rules. I need to show everyone what happens when you do not fall in line." I replayed it 3 times. Sharon had just admitted on camera that this was personal, and she was targeting me to send a message. That was my trump card. I saved the file to 3 places: my phone, my laptop, and a cloud drive. Then I went back to sleep. The hearing was at 7. I showed up at 6:45 with my binder and a thumb drive. The community room was a bland space with folding tables and cheap chairs. The board sat at the head table: Sharon, the board president San named Ed, the secretary-woman named Diane, and 2 at-large members. Linda from the management company sat off to the side with a laptop. About a dozen homeowners filled the chairs, including Marcus. Sharon saw me walk in, and her expression did not change. She was ready. Ed called the meeting to order and read the agenda. Item 4 was my hearing. He said, "We are here to address multiple violations at 428 Maple Ridge, including unpermitted construction, damage to common property, and refusal to comply with stop work orders. Mr. Homeowner, you have 15 minutes to present your case." I stood up and handed Linda the thumb drive. I said, "I would like to play a short audio clip as part of my evidence." Ed frowned. "What kind of clip?" I said, "A recording from the day Sharon Lewis confronted me at my property line." It is relevant to the question of whether these violations are legitimate or retaliatory. Sharon sat up straight. You cannot introduce that. It is out of scope. Ed looked at Linda. Linda shrugged. He's allowed to present evidence. Ed sighed. Fine. Play it. Linda plugged in the thumb drive and opened the file. The audio played through the room speakers. Sharon's voice filled the space. I am making an example of him. He thinks he can move in here and ignore the rules. I need to show everyone what happens when you do not fall in line. The room went silent. Ed looked at Sharon. Sharon looked at her phone. Diane, the secretary, leaned forward. Sharon, is that you? Sharon did not answer. I opened my binder and pulled out the timeline packet. I walked Ed through every step. The city permit, issued 3 weeks before Sharon's first email. The survey, completed by a licensed professional and verified by the city. The trench, 6 inches deep, on my property, for Gate Hardware. The fake invoice with the wrong address and wrong date. The contractor intimidation. The email blast with the recycled photo. I showed them the permit office statement confirming my work was compliant. I showed them the survey plat matching the corner stake Sharon claimed was fake. I showed them the metadata timestamps proving the photos Sharon used were taken before any work started. Then I played the clip again. Marcus stood up from the audience. I would like to add something. Ed nodded. Marcus said, Sharon has done this before. Last year she targeted a homeowner on Ridgewood over a mailbox. She stacked violations until he sold his house. I have emails. Several other homeowners murmured agreement. One woman in the back row said, she tried to fine me for parking my own car and my own driveway overnight. Another man said, she sent me a violation notice for a lawn ornament that was on my porch, not my lawn. Ed held up his hand. Okay. Let us stay on topic. But I could see his face. He was rattled. Sharon was losing the room. Sharon leaned into her microphone. This is a smear campaign. That audio is taken out of context. I was frustrated because the homeowner was being uncooperative. Ed cut her off. Sharon, the audio is pretty clear. You said you were making an example of him. That is not code enforcement. That is retaliation. Diane nodded. I agree. This does not look good. Sharon stood up. If you are not going to take this seriously, I will escalate to legal. Ed said, sit down, Sharon. We are taking it seriously. That is the problem. Ed turned to me. Do you have anything else? I said yes. I pulled out the fraudulent invoice and handed it to Ed. This invoice Sharon submitted claims I damaged common property, but the photos are from a different address, and the date is 2 days before Sharon even saw my property. I think Sharon fabricated this bill to justify fines. Ed looked at the invoice, then at Sharon. Sharon, did you verify this before you sent it? Sharon crossed her arms. The landscaping company provided it. I submitted it in good faith. Ed said, the address does not match. Sharon said, that is a clerical error. Ed closed the binder. I am going to call a recess. Board members, let us talk in the hall. The board left. The room buzzed with conversation. Marcus came over and clapped me on the shoulder. You nailed it. I said maybe, but Sharon still has the board president's ear. Marcus shook his head. Not after that audio. Ed is not stupid. He knows Sharon just exposed the HOA to a lawsuit. 10 minutes later, the board came back. Ed sat down and cleared his throat. After reviewing the evidence, the board finds no valid violation at 428 Maple Ridge. The stop work order is lifted. The fines are voided. The landscaping bill is rejected pending investigation. The homeowner is cleared to proceed with the permitted fence installation. Sharon, you are directed to cease all enforcement actions related to this property. Sharon stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. This is ridiculous. You are letting him walk all over the covenants. Ed said, Sharon, sit down. She did not sit. She grabbed her phone and her bag and walked out. The door slammed. The room exhaled. Ed looked at me. I apologize for the confusion. You are free to go. I thanked him and left. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I got a call from a tow yard. They said my truck had been towed from the Canyon Springs visitor lot overnight for violating parking restrictions. I said I did not park in the visitor lot. The clerk said, the authorization slip says otherwise. I asked who signed the authorization. He said, Sharon Lewis, HOA treasurer. I felt my blood pressure spike. I told the clerk I would be there in 20 minutes. The tow yard was a chain-link lot on the industrial side of town. The clerk was a guy in his 20s, with grease-stained hands. He showed me the authorization slip. It was on Canyon Springs HOA letterhead. It said my truck was parked illegally for over 48 hours in a no overnight zone. I told him my truck was parked in my own driveway all night. He shrugged. I just tow what they tell me to tow. I need proof of ownership and $200 to release it. I showed him my registration. He looked at it, then at the slip. The VIN does not match. I looked at the slip. The VN was off by 2 digits. I said, this is not even my truck. Somebody made a mistake. The clerk said, a tow yard clerk says the HOA paperwork is missing and wants me to prove chain of custody. You need to take it up with the HOA. I called Linda. She said she would look into it. I called Ed. He did not answer. I called Marcus. He said Sharon is retaliating. You need to file a police report. I drove to the nearest sheriff's substation and filed a report for false towing authorization. The deputy took my statement and said he would follow up with the HOA. Then I went back to the management company office and demanded Linda pull the tow authorization record. She found it in the system. It had been submitted at 11:30 the night before, less than 4 hours after the hearing. The submitter was Sharon Lewis. The VIN was wrong. The location was wrong. The whole thing was fake. Linda printed the record and handed it to me. I am sorry. This should not have happened. I will notify the board. I asked if Sharon could be removed. Linda said, that is up to the homeowners. You would need a petition and a vote. I asked how many signatures I needed. She said 20% of the membership to trigger a recall hearing. I did the math. Canyon Springs had 82 homes. I needed 17 signatures. I told Linda I would get them. I spent the next 2 days going door to door. Most people signed immediately. A few said they did not want to get involved. One guy said Sharon had been on the board for 8 years and nobody had ever challenged her. I told him that was the problem. He signed. By day 3, I had 23 signatures. I delivered the petition to Linda. She said, I will schedule a special meeting. It has to be within 30 days. I said, make it sooner. She said, 2 weeks. I said, fine. Sharon did not go quietly. She sent another email blast. This one accused me of harassment, defamation, and conspiracy to undermine the HOA. She said the recall petition was invalid because I had coerced signatures. She attached a screenshot of a text message that was supposedly from me, threatening a homeowner. The screenshot was fake. The phone number was not mine. The text was full of grammar mistakes I would never make. I forwarded the email to Linda with a note. Sharon just committed defamation in writing. Please forward this to the board and legal counsel. Linda replied, already done. The recall hearing was scheduled for a Monday night. The community room was packed. Every chair was filled, and people stood along the walls. The board sat at the head table, minus Sharon. Ed started the meeting by reading the petition. He said, the homeowners have requested a vote to remove Sharon Lewis from the board of directors, citing abuse of authority, retaliation, and fraudulent enforcement actions. Sharon has the right to respond. Sharon walked in late, carrying a briefcase and wearing a red visor. She sat in the front row and stared straight ahead. Ed invited her to speak. She stood and addressed the room. She said, I have served this community for 8 years. I have kept our property values stable. I have enforced the rules fairly and consistently. This recall is a personal attack by one disgruntled homeowner who refuses to follow the covenants. She pointed at me. He moved in 2 years ago and has caused nothing but trouble. He ignores notices. He films board members. He turns neighbors against each other. If you remove me, you are telling every future homeowner that the rules do not matter. She sat down. The room was silent. Ed invited me to respond. I stood up. I did not bring a speech. I brought the timeline packet, the fake invoice, the fake tow slip, the fake text screenshot, and the audio clip. I handed them to Ed. I said, Sharon just told you she enforces the rules fairly. These documents show she fabricates violations, falsifies records, and retaliates against homeowners who challenge her. The audio clip shows she admitted targeting me to make an example. The tow slip shows she tried to steal my truck. The email blast shows she defamed me with a fake screenshot. If you keep Sharon on the board, you are telling every future homeowner that abuse of power is acceptable. I sat down. Marcus stood up. I would like to speak. Ed nodded. Marcus said, I have lived here for 15 years. I have watched Sharon bully homeowners, inflate costs, and twist the rules to suit her agenda. Last year, she forced a man to sell his house over a mailbox. This year, she tried to stop a legal fence project with fake violations. How many more people have to leave before we admit Sharon is the problem? He sat down. 3 more homeowners stood and spoke. All of them had stories about Sharon. Fake fines, harassment, threats. By the time they finished, Sharon was staring at the floor. Ed called for a vote. He said all homeowners present are eligible to vote. A simple majority is required to remove a board member. Raise your hand if you vote to remove Sharon Lewis. I counted the hands. 42. Ed said raise your hand if you vote to keep Sharon Lewis. I counted again. 6. Ed said, the motion passes. Sharon Lewis is removed from the board, effective immediately. Sharon stood up, grabbed her briefcase, and walked out. She did not look at anyone. The door slammed. The room erupted in applause. Ed adjourned the meeting. People came up to me afterward and shook my hand. One woman said, thank you for standing up to her. A man said, I wish I had done this years ago. Marcus said, you just changed this neighborhood. I said, I just wanted to build a fence. He laughed. Well, now you can. The next day, I called my original contractor. He said, I heard what happened. Congratulations. When do you want to start? I said, tomorrow. He said, I will be there at 8. The next morning, he showed up with his crew and a truckload of materials. We set the first post before 9. By noon, we had the corner section framed. By the end of the day, we had 6 panels up. Sharon did not show. Nobody from the HOA showed. It was just me, the contractor, and the sound of a drill. 2 days later, the fence was finished. 6 feet tall, cedar privacy panels, exactly as permitted. I stood in my backyard and looked at it. It was perfect. The gate swung smooth. The posts were plumb. The stain was even. I took a photo and sent it to Marcus. He replied, looks great. You earned it. I replied, yeah. I did. The following week, the board held a regular meeting. Ed announced that the HOA would be conducting an audit of all enforcement actions from the past 2 years. He said, we want to make sure we are applying the rules fairly and consistently. If you received a fine or violation notice that you believe was unjust, please contact the management company. We will review each case individually. Over the next month, 17 homeowners filed complaints. The board reversed 12 fines, voided 8 violation notices, and issued formal apologies to 6 families. The HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints pile up. It was not perfect, but it was progress. Sharon sold her house 3 months later. The listing went up on a Tuesday. It sold in 4 days. I never saw her again. The new owners were a young couple with a dog. They introduced themselves the day they moved in. They said, we heard there was some HOA drama before we bought. Is it better now? I said, it is getting there. They said, good. We just want to live in peace. I said, me too. The board elected a new treasurer, a retired accountant named Paul, who promised transparency and fair enforcement. He sent a newsletter to all homeowners outlining the new complaint process, the audit results, and a revised interpretation of the landscaping rules. The newsletter said, property line fences under 6 feet on private lots do not require board approval, only notification. If you have questions, contact the management company. It was a small change, but it mattered. Marcus hosted a backyard barbecue that summer. He invited half the street. I brought ribs. We stood by my fence and talked about the recall. Someone said, I still cannot believe Sharon tried to tow your truck. Marcus said, I can. She was desperate. Another neighbor said, I am just glad she is gone. I raised my beer. To fair enforcement. Everyone clinked bottles. It felt good. I got a call from Linda a few weeks later. She said, I wanted to let you know the board finalized the audit report. They found evidence that Sharon had been altering dates on violation notices and recycling photos for at least 18 months. The management company is updating its procedures to prevent that from happening again. I asked if Sharon faced any legal consequences. Linda said, the board decided not to pursue it. They just want to move on. I said I understood. I did not love it, but I understood. Sometimes closure is better than revenge. The fence held up through the winter. No warping, no loose panels, no complaints. The following spring, I planted a row of shrubs along the base. They grew fast. By summer, the fence was framed in green. It looked like it had always been there. A couple of neighbors put up fences after that. Nobody had any trouble. The new board was true to their word. I ran into Ed at the hardware store one Saturday. He said, I owe you an apology. I should have stepped in sooner with Sharon. I said, you stepped in when it mattered. He nodded. Still, I am sorry you had to go through that. I told him it was fine. He said, for what it is worth, you changed how we do things. The board is a lot more careful now. I said, good. That is all I wanted. He shook my hand and walked away. That summer, the HOA held an election for open board seats. Paul ran for re-election as treasurer. Marcus ran for an at-large seat. Both won. The new board passed a resolution requiring all enforcement actions to include photographic evidence with verified timestamps, written justification citing specific covenant sections, and a mandatory review period before fines could be assessed. It was not flashy, but it was real reform. The kind that sticks. I got a thank you card in the mail from the couple who had complained about Sharon's mailbox enforcement. It said, we heard you were the one who started the recall. Thank you for standing up. We never thought anyone would. It made a difference. I put the card on my fridge. It is still there. The anniversary of the recall came and went. The neighborhood felt different. Quieter. Less tense. People waved when they drove by. Kids played in the street. The HOA sent out normal newsletters about landscaping tips and community events, not violation threats. It felt like a neighborhood again, not a battlefield. Marcus and I were sitting on his porch one evening, drinking coffee, watching the sun go down. He said, you ever regret moving here? I thought about it. I said, no. I like it here. He said, even after everything with Sharon? I said, especially after everything with Sharon. He laughed. Fair enough. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, you know, people still talk about that hearing. The audio clip. The fake invoice. The petition. You are a legend. I said I am not a legend. I just wanted to build a fence. He said, same thing. The fence is still there. It does its job. It keeps my dog in the yard. It gives me privacy. It marks the property line. That is all I ever wanted. But it also represents something bigger. It is proof that you can fight back against petty tyrants and win, as long as you have evidence, patience, and a community willing to back you up. Sharon thought she could bully me into giving up. She was wrong. The HOA is not perfect. No HOA is. But it is better than it was. The board listens now. They follow their own rules. They treat homeowners like people, not problems. And when someone does try to abuse their power, there is a process to stop them. That matters. I still have the timeline packet in a binder on my shelf. I have not looked at it in months, but I keep it as a reminder. A reminder that documentation matters, that procedures matter, that standing up matters. Sharon Lewis tried to make an example of me, and in a way, she succeeded. Just not the way she intended. I became an example of what happens when you refuse to be intimidated, when you build your case brick by brick, and when you trust that the truth will eventually win. The last time I saw the property corner, I noticed something. The survey stake Sharon claimed was fake is still there, exactly where the surveyor placed it. The ground around it is undisturbed. The fence line matches the plat to the inch. Everything is correct. Everything is legal. Everything is documented. And Sharon is gone. Karen insists on a deadline, and the timestamp proves she lied. That fake invoice with the wrong date was the smoking gun. Sharon pushed so hard, so fast, that she got sloppy. She recycled photos. She altered dates. She fabricated records. And when I laid it all out in front of the board with timestamps that did not match, she had no defense. Her own paperwork betrayed her. The HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints pile up. Once the audit started, homeowners came forward with stories going back years. The board could not ignore it. They had to change the system or risk lawsuits. So they did. They rewrote the enforcement procedures. They added oversight. They made it harder for one person to weaponize the rules. Sharon Lewis is forced to apologize on the record in front of the room. That part did not happen exactly like I imagined. She never said the words, but she was forced to sit there and listen as the board reversed her decisions, voided her fines, and stripped her of her authority. That was her apology. Public, humiliating, and permanent. A neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting. That petition was the turning point. Without it, Sharon would have stayed on the board and continued her campaign. But Marcus and the other neighbors stepped up. They signed, they showed up, they voted, and they removed her. I will share another story next time.